For now, they're playing, and for West Virginia, trying to turn a successful November into a productive 2020. We talk West Virginia football on the Voice of College Football next. MarkRogersTV, the Voice of College Football, breaking down the Mountaineers. We got Schuyler Callihan on the line from Mountaineer Maven. You can catch his platform there on Sports Illustrated, talking West Virginia football. Schuyler, it's been a while. How you doing today?
Doing good, Mark. It's glad to be back on here and finally talking some football instead of all the nonsense around the virus. It's finally good to get back in the thick of things here, hopefully.
Yeah, so it's been pretty obvious that with the decisions of the Big Ten and the Pac-12 and then the speculation concerning the other three conferences is that's what we've been locked on, of course, and had to talk about, call-in shows and the whole deal. So I've got hours and hours and hours of videos there. People dive in if you want to hear more about the breakdowns of the health versus the money versus the litigation and all that business. But we're here to talk West Virginia football and get the breakdown on the Mountaineers because as of right now, the Big 12, and I think this is the term that's used over and over and over and over, is committed to a fall season. That doesn't mean it can't change, but they are committed to playing football this fall. So good news for Neal Brown in his second season, despite Schuyler missing a bowl game for the first time since 2013, and 5-7 on the surface doesn't look great. Beating TCU, Kansas State in November, two decent teams, especially the Wildcats, winning 8 games, a positive November to springboard into 2020, hopefully.
Yeah, definitely. There's a big difference in how the team played in November compared to the early parts of the season. And a lot of that had to do with the youth and the maturation that happened throughout that season because really the entire West Virginia offense, I think it was like 80 or 90% of the offensive production from the 2018 team was gone. They went on to the NFL, guys like Will Grier, David Sills, Gary Jennings, list goes on and on and on. And they had to replace all that in one offseason with a whole new coaching staff implementing a completely new scheme. It was a similar scheme, but there's obviously some changes in verbiage and everything else. So, I think that at the beginning, it was really what we expected. And it was all about, can they finish strong? Can they finish off the season on a good note and kind of carry that into 2020? And that's exactly what they did. And it's not a shock because Neal Brown is such a good head coach. He's very detail-oriented, and he really knows how to get the best out of his players. And I think that's why you saw guys like Bryce Wheaton and Sam James last year, receiver, really take that next step. And really the quarterback position, it was just an anomaly last year. Austin Kendall and Jarrett Deggy both had really rough seasons. But we'll see how that quarterback competition unfolds here in this training camp because it's going to be a fun one to watch.
Yeah, as you mentioned, the production of the offense was down significantly last year. It wasn't a situation where you couldn't run the ball, but you had a Will Grier throwing it all over the yard. 73 yards rushing per game. That was near the bottom of the FBS at number 128, plus the inconsistent quarterback play and passing game. As you mentioned, Austin Kendall won the job through 10 interceptions against only 12 touchdown passes. You had a change in November. So do you think that leads us into what the quarterback battle looks like heading into September?
It's going to be interesting because I really, for some reason, think that Austin Kendall is someone that Neal Brown really, really likes. He coached his brother at Kentucky, and I think that there's always been this connection and this fascination with Austin Kendall. And everyone wants to downplay Austin Kendall that he doesn't have the talent. I, for one, think he's got the talent. He played much of last season hurt. He had a leg in a brace for most of the season. He had a banged up hand. So there was a lot of things holding him back, not to mention a lackluster offensive line, a young receiving core, and a running back group that just could not get anything going. So when you add all that together, it's not going to help out. So when you look at Jarrett Deggy, he's got a little bit more, I think, to him. He's got a lot bigger upside. He plays with an edge. He kind of reminds you of that Johnny Manziel a little bit, not in the way he plays, but just the way he attacks the game and his approach. That he's got a little bit of swagger to him. And for some reason, I think that the Mountaineers have a little bit more efficiency with Deggy at quarterback than Kendall. Now, is that who's going to win the job? I don't know. It's been pretty sealed tight so far, but I think it's going to go right down to probably the opening game And, with a little bit extra time leading up until the first game of the season, I think you're going to see that quarterback competition go all the way up until that week.
MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, breaking down the game we love each and every day with the best bloggers, broadcasters, and writers in the industry. Analysis from myself, best discussion, debate, and analysis right here. If you subscribe, you turn on the bell for the notifications. You know when we go live, which is almost every day. We got Schuyler Callihan on the line. Mountaineer Maven. It's the SI.com platform for West Virginia football. So you mentioned Sam James. He's coming back with 69 catches, couple touchdowns. You lose a lot of production at running back, but Letty Brown is back. Set up the playmakers for us.
Well, Sam James and Letty Brown are obviously two of the most important guys of this offense. If those guys don't play well, this offense is going to just absolutely fall apart. Sam James has such high potential, and really, as good as he was last year, he really – I don't think he played his best football. I think he was really spotty, really inconsistent. He's got to do a better job of holding on to the ball. There's many times where he was open and just had the ball fall right through his hands. And he's got to get a little bit better in the physical game too. He's a pretty big receiver, but he doesn't play that way. I think he uses his speed and relies on it more so than anything else. And with Letty Brown, I mean, this is the year for him. He's been behind Kennedy McCoy, Martell Pettaway for the last few years, even going back to his freshman year when he sit behind like Justin Crawford and those guys. This is his turn, or excuse me, not Justin Crawford, but you get the point that he's been sitting in the balances for a while. So this is his time to take over as the every down back. Can he be that guy? I'm assuming he can, but the offensive line's got to help him out. And really, when you look around the running back room, he's got to be the guy. Alex Sinkfield has not played a whole lot in his career. Tony Mathis got a little bit of action last year as a redshirt, or in his freshman season. He's come back as a redshirt freshman, and they got Avarius Sparrow, a true freshman that may or may not play a whole lot. So, when you look around that room, Letty Brown has to be that guy that steps up. But, looking around, where else, you lose George Campbell at receiver. So now you look at Bryce Wheaton, you look at Isaiah Easdale, and, Sam Brown is a really intriguing freshman that I think is going to make a lot of plays in 2020.
And if the offense struggles, it's typically the quarterback, some combination of the quarterback and the offensive line, because even if you don't have great skill position players, they're typically going to do their thing if they've got space. So it's quarterback, offensive line. So what are your prospects of the offensive line getting better?
I think they're going to make another step in the right direction, but I don't know if they're quite there yet. There's still a lot of uncertainty, especially at the tackle position. You lose both of your starting tackles, Colton McKivitz and Kelby Wickline. McKivitz now gone on to the 49ers in the NFL draft. So now you got to replace two tackles with a group that is mainly going to consist of redshirt freshmen, redshirt sophomore, and freshmen. So it's going to be very young at the tackle position. I think you're going to see a lot of growing pains. But I do like the guys that they have battling for those two spots. You got Junior Uzibu, Parker Moore, Brandon Yates, and they even have a junior college guy, Tariq Stewart, who I think is probably going to lock down the right tackle's position. He's a big human being, and I think he's going to be a big part of what glues that offensive line together. In the middle, they seem to be okay. James Gamitter, Chase Barrett, and Mike Brown really seem to kind of be in a safe spot in terms of their starting position. But the tackle position is really where it's going to be important to see how they grow.
So for somebody that doesn't keep track of West Virginia on a regular basis, they tune into a game. You're talking Neil Brown offense and his stamp, his flavor, his scheme. What's the look? What do we expect?
Well, it's basically just like any other Big 12 offense or spread offense attack. The only thing with Neil Brown is he likes to move guys around. He likes to send guys in motion, whether it's as a decoy with Winston Wright on a fake jet sweep, or getting other guys involved in the passing game that normally wouldn't. He likes to even do maybe a little bit of trickery at times. He's not going to rely on it, but we saw it last year against North Carolina State. They did a double pass that ended up breaking down, and Sean Ryan took off for a big first down. So he's creative, and really, I've always looked at him as his offensive identity just really bases around what he has, because he's never, when you look back at his years at Troy and his first year at West Virginia, he's never been pass heavy. He's never been run heavy. He's always been whatever fits with that year's roster and that year's personnel. So whatever is going to work for him is what he's going to use. He's not going to be keen on being a guy that's going to throw the ball 50, 60 times just because that's who he is, or a guy that runs the ball 40, 50 times because that's who he is. He's going to be a guy that is always fitting into what he has on his roster. And this year, I mean, again, I think you're probably going to see him spread it out a little bit more and stretch the field with guys like Sean Ryan and Sam James, because they have more talent at the receiver position than they do in that backfield.
Going to the Big 12 to talk West Virginia football with Schuyler Callihan, a Mountaineer Maven. It's on SI.com. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. We break down teams across the nation and are excited to talk West Virginia because they're one of the teams that currently are playing, and we don't have to talk about a possible spring or next fall or whatever. We hope to see the Mountaineers with the 9 Big 12 games and most likely a non-conference game. That's the model set out there by the Big 12. Let's talk to the defense. And again, encourage everybody to subscribe right here. You hit the bell for the notifications and you know when we go live. Darius Stills thought about the NFL, but he's back up front. Leads a defense that I don't know if it's based on schedule and opponents, but kind of like the offense, there was some hope in playing better down the stretch.
Yeah, I think they did play a little bit better. And obviously the changing of the guard, not having your defensive coordinator back, that's going to be a huge, story to watch as the season unfolds. They don't have a true defensive coordinator going into the season. They're splitting the duties, as Jordan Leslie, the defensive line coach, is going to handle things up front. Jamal Adai is going to handle the back end. So I don't know who's going to call the plays. I'm being told it's going to be Jordan Leslie. He's the guy that's been in charge of the meetings. But when you have two guys like Dante and Darius Stills, I mean, that's a really good start. And you got a guy like Jeff Pooler, who I thought was really starting to come on strong at the end of last year. Taj Alston should be back probably in the middle point of the season. He's still coming back from an injury. You got Quay Mays, a junior college guy. That defensive line is really going to be interesting to watch, and it's going to be the focal point of the defense. One guy I really, really like, I wrote about him today, is true freshman Akeem Mesidor. This guy jumps off the film, off the screen when you watch him. He reminds me a lot of Darius Stills, actually. Same type of playmaker. He's a slippery guy up front. He's quick. He can get in the backfield, lives back there. Linebacking core is okay. I would say at the starting position, you got Vandarius Cowan and Josh Chandler, but the depth there is a real issue. Secondary is kind of up in there. You don't really know what you're going to get. Still a very young secondary with Nick Troy Fortune and Tyke Smith. And now you have Kerry Martin, who's going to opt out of the season. So there's a lot of questions in that secondary.
Sean Malone, Josh Chandler, players that you mentioned, 2 top tacklers last year. They're both back. You mentioned the Stills boys. They're both back, leading the team with 7 sacks each. So production's back, at least at the top of the line. Any talk about, based on the coordinator change and the sharing of duties, what the defensive approach is going to look like?
Well, Neil Brown came out and said it's basically going to be the same thing. There's going to be some minor changes. And I actually spoke with former Troy head coach Larry Blakeney right after this all went down and kind of got his thoughts on what Jordan Leslie may run if he is the defensive coordinator. And he said it's basically the same thing that Vic Koenning ran. So there's a lot of parallels going here, that it's going to be the same attack. It's going to be the same scheme. They're going to be very multiple. I don't think there's not been any position changes to this point, so I think everything stands pat. There may be some change again in the terminology of the defense or some of the schemes that they want to run, but I think for the most part it's going to be a 3-4, 4-3 look where they're bouncing guys back and forth. They like to have 2 edge rushers, 2 stand-up edge rushers like Vandarius Cowan and Jared Bartlett will be 2 guys that you can watch for those positions. So they like to get after the quarterback, and I think maybe even with Vic Koenning out, you may see West Virginia be a little bit more aggressive in trying to get after the quarterback.
Folks, please like the video, even if you don't necessarily agree with my opinion on college football. If you enjoy what we deliver here, whether that's from me or the many guests that we bring on If you love college football, please like the video, share it out on social media. People don't know we're around, don't know Schuyler Callihan and his product there at Mountaineer Maven. Please, again, you are in contact with people on social media that don't know about us. So please share the videos and subscribe right here at MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. So a little mystery about the schedule in terms of the opponents. Unlike the other conferences, when you hear 2 games are added in conference, everybody's scrambling and has an opinion on, oh man, we got screwed. We got the 2 best teams in the conference or whatever the situation. But in the Big 12, regardless of what you have to say about lack of divisions, I've said for years that it's the truest champion because everybody plays everybody, and that's as fair as it gets. So that holds firm. It's been shuffled around a little bit, and now you've got some uncertainty regarding the Eastern Kentucky opener on September 12th.
Yeah, there's been a lot of speculation about it. The High Valley Conference just came out I believe it was yesterday, and said that they're going to allow their schools to participate in 4 non-conference games and then play 7 additional games later in the spring. To me, that was a wacky decision. I don't know why they're doing that. And again, I don't want to get into the logistics, but I don't think a spring season is even possible anyways. But going back to the West Virginia game, when you look at the major concern, there was an Eastern Kentucky kicker that came out, I believe, a week or 2 ago that said that really the conditions of the testing and the safety protocols were not being I don't know if they were not taken seriously or whatever the case may be, but he did not feel safe, so he left the team. They were not being tested as often as probably, West Virginia is being tested. So that brings, a good question up. Does West Virginia think about just canceling that game and just playing their Big 12 schedule, or maybe looking for somewhere else that is maybe taking the protocols more seriously? Because you can't risk the entire conference schedule for a non-conference FCS team that may or may not have a player test positive and they don't know it, and then they spread it to West Virginia. So it's going to be very interesting to see how this unfolds. And I know Shane Lyons, the athletic director, is going to keep a good eye on this. And they have had talks with some other schools from the Sun Belt and whatnot. When this was all before they just settled on the 1 non-conference game. So I don't know if they're still in contact with those folks or not. But, Eastern Kentucky right now, they're on the schedule, but I wouldn't be shocked if they end up being removed at some point.
Unfortunately, we missed the showdown with Florida State in Atlanta. Would have loved to have seen that. We'll see what happens with all these non-conference games that are being canceled this year. People are asking about that. They ask me every day. That's the last thing on people's mind at this point. They'll work out contracts and figure out there's plenty of open dates out there. So we'll see what happens with that. In terms of the Big 12, I always thought it was best for a conference to establish rivalries, even if they don't exist. So obviously, Oklahoma State's a rivalry. We don't have to deal with that. But West Virginia, an outlier geographically in the conference, who's their rival? Well, they played the big showdown against Oklahoma to determine Big 12 championship status a few years ago. Great game down to the wire. But I figure Oklahoma State should play the last game of the season. They've been matched up against Iowa State a number of times. That doesn't work, but nobody really works for West Virginia, so you might as well establish something. I just figure that they should have a set opponent to conclude the season as kind of like what the conference is going to force as a rival. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that and the total layout of the schedule and the way it should look.
Yeah, it's tough for West Virginia. I mean, ever since they've come to the Big 12, it's just kind of felt like they're the redheaded stepchild in this thing. But I personally think, from listening to the fans and what they have to say, Texas is the one where they have the most angst against and the one that they just absolutely hate. Everyone in the Big 12 conference can say that. There's nobody in the Big 12 that likes Texas except for Texas fans. But as of on the field, from former players that I've heard from and stuff like that, the one team that really seems to either talk the most trash or they seem to not have the most love for is actually Baylor. It's kind of a weird team I would have never expected, but West Virginia Baylor on the field from former players have told me that's a team that they cannot stand. They do not like Baylor, but they thrive off of hating Texas, and the fans hating Texas. Every time they come to town, it's nothing but horns down everywhere, signs, T-shirts. I mean, it's all over the place. Football, basketball. I mean, everyone just dislikes Texas to the fullest. But as far as the Big 12 schedule, I actually think playing Texas at the end of the year would work out because Oklahoma and Oklahoma State, they play at the end. Texas and Oklahoma play usually early in the year. So West Virginia and Texas could play at the end of the season. And I do like the fact that the Big 12 plays everybody. Anybody that's followed me knows that I love that. And I think that really everywhere else should adopt this. And I get it's going to be different because teams or other conferences have more teams, but maybe there shouldn't be as big of conferences. I think you don't have a true champion if you don't play everybody. Because when you're in the SEC or the ACC, you're playing maybe a school in the opposite division once every 6 or 7 years. How's that a conference? I mean, you're not really familiar with each other. You may come in and play a team in your freshman year, and you may be there 5 or 6 years and never see them again. So that's what I like about the Big 12. And as far as this year, I think that they've got a good grasp of how to go about this. And I know there's some talk about maybe Nebraska coming back and joining just for this one season, and that's been laid to rest. But I think Nebraska getting back in the Big 12 would be great. And, I think West Virginia going to the ACC would be great too, but they don't listen to what I have to say. So.
Well, I am completely on board with what you have to say about conference scheduling. It is ridiculous to me that at least the Big Ten attempts with 9 games to limit that situation. But in the ACC and the SEC, they play 8 games. They've got 14 teams. That means there's 13 other teams. You're missing 5 teams. I broke this down several seasons ago, Schuyler. I looked at Alabama and LSU, obviously playing in the same division. They play each other. They play all the same teams in the division, but they're playing 2 different teams in the other division. Well, in that particular year, Alabama was playing Kentucky and Tennessee, who were 2-14 in the SEC the previous season. LSU was playing Georgia and Florida, who were 14-2 the previous season in the SEC. So how that can be fair that 2 teams competing for a division championship, one that they have 6 out of 8 games the same, but the 2 different ones, you're playing 14-2, they're playing 2-14. That's real fair. And I do that every year. I look at the conferences, and you can find outliers like that every year in every conference where it's like, how is this fair?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the college football playoff and you have all those SEC teams fighting for a spot, you have, like you said, you may have a team like LSU's got to play Georgia and Florida, and if they have one loss, they're gonna ding them for that. I mean, but they're gonna give Alabama the credit for playing the easier or the weaker opponents. I mean, I don't understand it. I've been an advocate for a long time saying that the playoff needs to expand beyond the 4 teams because at some point, 5-6 years down the road, I mean, it's already like this, but you're already seeing the same teams year in and year out being there. That's why March Madness is so wonderful and it's so great because anybody has a shot. There's always a Cinderella. You're not going to get a Cinderella when the top 4 teams are taken in. You're not going to have a Central Florida from the year they went undefeated, maybe upset in Alabama one year and just get lucky. I mean, you don't know. And I think really, and Mike Leach said this too, you look at everywhere else, the NFL, the MLB, the NHL, they have more than 4 teams. They have, sometimes half of the league gets in. So why not play, a 64-team playoff in football? I mean, I don't think it's safe. I don't think it should ever go that far or that extreme. But why not an 8 or maybe even a 12-team playoff? I think it benefits everybody.
You're preaching my game, Schuyler. I tell you, all you have to do is look at the playoff. They've been playing it for 6 years, and this is your formula. The SEC, mostly Alabama, LSU and Georgia popped in once, but Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, Oklahoma. That's your field. That's it every year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's what it's been.
And you look at the Big Ten, and they have really struggled, in the playoff. Michigan State, Ohio State struggled when they were in there, and they haven't really been a force ever since. I mean, even the Pac-12, since Oregon went to the national championship, they haven't had anybody. So, they had, I think Washington one year, but they have not been a factor in a long, long time, and I don't know that they're going to. And also, I mean, this is kind of going way off the topic here, but I think really, if you want to have this format, you need to move to where the group of 5 has their own playoff because it's not fair to these kids that bust their tails all season long and they have virtually no shot. Even if they go undefeated, we saw it with Central Florida. They had no shot to get to the college football playoff. Give those guys something to compete for and have a group of 5 national college playoff championship and have the Power 5 do its own thing. Because at the end of the day, the Power 5, they're going to have more resources. They're going to have better recruits come in. They're going to have better facilities. They're going to have an advantage. So why not split the two into 2 completely different things?
Yeah, here's the deal I would like to make with the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. Either you include 1 spot for the group of 5, and this is after you need to expand to at least 8. So you got a spot for the group of 5, or you divide it and say, you go play your championship, we'll play our championship, or you need to have the selection committee take a tour in August in a regular year. Take a tour in August, and they got to meet with every group of 5 team, and with all 100 players in front of them, tell them basically, you're going through 2 days in 95-degree heat. You can win every game. You got no shot at making the playoff. See ya.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly how it is. And I feel for some of these kids,
Sure.
I've talked to several, hundreds or maybe even 1,000 kids by now, by covering recruiting. And I know a lot of these kids get offered by West Virginia and they may end up going to a group of 5 school. And I know the determination they have, the motivation they have to be a great player and want to win a national championship, but they have no chance if they go to Cincinnati or to Houston or Central Florida or Boise State or anywhere like that. They have to go to a Power 5, and I think it really takes away a lot of these kids, from not being able to have that chance at a national championship. So, yeah, if you're not going to break off and have an own group of 5, you have to save a spot, and one of my original ideas was give an automatic bid to every Power 5 champion and then have 3 at-large bids, with one of them going to a group of 5 school.
And not to belabor the topic, because we didn't bring you on here to talk college football playoff, but once you get me started on this, I can't let go, and you've got some great points to make as well. Anybody who says that the playoff field is going to be watered down, again, I know that this is not professional sports, but the NFL and Major League Baseball are like 30 to 35% of the teams make the playoffs. The NBA's used to be at 50%. They're at 50% right now. They used to be over that. NHL, it's ridiculous too. So we're talking about, even if we go to 8, and people all the time are telling me, it wouldn't be competitive, blah, blah, blah. 8 teams out of 130, that's 6%. You were still talking about the very top, and you can go year to year to year to year. You would never have a 9-3 team make it. They'd be 10-2, 11-2 with a conference championship at the very least. And then I hear all the time, Schuyler, that can you imagine the number 8 team in the country winning the college football playoff? That wouldn't be fair, that to have the 8th best team in the country win the playoff. Well, number one, they must not be the 8th best team in the country, because you know what? If that's not earning a championship, if you're the 8th seed and you beat the number 1 team in the country, then you beat the number 2 team in the country, and then you beat a 3rd team that's somewhere in the top 7 in the country. If you beat 3 of the top 7 teams in the country, that's probably earning a championship like nothing we've ever seen.
Exactly. I know it's a different sport, but the LA Kings in the NHL, they won the Stanley Cup as an 8 seed. And I believe UConn, they won the NCAA championship, and I think they were at least a 7 or 8 seed, if not worse. So, you have to, and all these people also say, 8 teams, it's too much or whatever. Don't tell me that you wouldn't watch an 8-team playoff if it happened, because you would. It's more football, more entertainment. And it gives these guys more of a chance, and especially for a team like West Virginia, they've come close 3 times within the last 30 years of winning a national championship. They lost the national championship in 1988 against Notre Dame. In '93, they went undefeated but got left out over a 1-loss Florida State team. If there had been a playoff back then, who knows what could have happened? And in 2007, when Pat White went down with an injury against Pitt, they would have still had a chance to play for national title with him healthy. So I think from West Virginia's standpoint on this, the fans would love to see the playoff expanded, because they know there's no chance in heck, even if they go 11-1 and have several quality wins, if there is a 2-loss Alabama team in the mix that has 2 quality losses, they're going to take a 2-quality loss Alabama over a 1-loss West Virginia every single year. They have no chance.
And we should also not be building a playoff system that is addressing the strength of teams right now. Meaning, as you alluded to, right now, Clemson and Alabama always make it. And the only teams that have been competitive, let's face it, has basically been Clemson and Alabama, anybody that makes it from the SEC, and Ohio State. They got blown out one time. The other 2 times they went through the whole thing, won the national title. The other time, obviously, last year they played a great game. So we get a blowout in the semifinal anyway, most of the time, and maybe 2 of them. So we're going to add 4 games, and I guarantee you, maybe 1 or 2 of them are going to be, it's going to be like, why'd we play this game? This is a blowout. But you don't want to see 2 additional really close, excellent college football games. Yeah. And then in addition to that, regardless of the Pac-12's not been competitive for a few years, they were extremely competitive and really good. And we don't know what the future holds in the future. But in the past, the Pac-12 has been extremely good going back before 5 years. Oregon came within a field goal of winning a national title in 2010 against Auburn. You don't do that in athletics if you're competitive and fair and balanced, where you leave conferences out. The NFL, sometimes there's a division winner that goes 9-7. It's not like the NFL decides, the AFC North really sucks this year, we're going to leave them out.
Exactly. I mean, there's even times where a team with a losing record like Seattle, the Seattle Seahawks went 7-9, I think, and won the NFC West one year, and that was the year that Marshawn Lynch had his big run. So, I mean, you're telling me that, a 7-9 Seahawks team that didn't even have a winning record went to the playoffs. We wouldn't have had that big, Marshawn Lynch, postseason run against the Saints if it wasn't for them being in the playoffs. So, and I know it's a completely different spectrum, but again, that's exactly your point. I mean, that's like saying, let's just wipe out a whole division because they didn't have a certain record. I don't really know how you can base things off of strength of schedule anyways, because to me, it's all about the eyeball test. And when you look at certain teams like Clemson, Alabama, when you watch them, they're one of the best teams in the country. But some teams, even a Texas for that matter, they always enter the preseason rankings way too high, and they always come crashing down and end up like 7-5 or 8-4. So how can you say a quality win versus somebody and a quality loss? And that's the one term I hate so much, is quality loss. There's no such thing as a quality loss. If you lose the game, you lose the game. So, a loss versus Alabama to me is essentially, going to be the same as a loss to Vanderbilt. I mean, I know they're 2 different teams and one's a lot better than the other, but you didn't win the game. So if just because you look better in a loss against somebody else doesn't mean you be credited for that.
We could argue that point, though, Schuyler. That's the one place where I would have a bit of a differing opinion, that if we're going by the eyeball test, I think it would matter that if you're playing within a field goal of Alabama, that's showing something other than rather comparing you to somebody else who lost by 5 touchdowns to Alabama. Yeah,
I could see that. I think there's arguments to be made about it. I don't think we're ever going to have a picture perfect playoff, scenario or setup, because someone's always going to be mad that they're going to be left out. And it's the same thing with March Madness. People were upset when they expanded the tournament to 64 teams, now to 68. And there's still people that are wishing that it would expand even further beyond that. So you're never going to get a picture perfect playoff picture. But I think at some point you have to legitimately look at expanding the playoff. And honestly, it may happen once you start seeing some of these conferences potentially break away from the NCAA.
Yeah, so my argument against the people that say the people that get left out are going to complain regardless of what, if you're at 8, the team number 9, or if you're at 16, team number 17. My argument against that is, yes, you're going to have that. But if you include all the conferences, then you at least have a representative from that conference, and really nobody can complain. Go win your conference. Right. Now, give me the criteria of what I asked somebody this the other night after they were complaining about whatever with the college football playoff or defending it. And I said, give me the criteria. Give me one criteria for winning, making the college football playoff. I said, there are 0. And they said, well, if you go undefeated. I said, no. If all 5 conference winners go undefeated, one of them gets left out. There is no one criteria for making the playoff. You can't give me one thing that a team can do to guarantee that they're going to make the playoff. Zero.
Well,
so nobody's guaranteed, regardless of going out and winning every game 75-0, making the playoff. It's out of their control.
The only criteria I would say is you just have to be Alabama.
Well, that might be it.
At the end of the day, they're going to get their respect. But as far as win-loss and who you play, it doesn't matter. We've seen that many, many times over and over again. They say they take strength of schedule into consideration, but I don't know if they necessarily do. I mean, the year TCU got left out, I don't think that should have happened. They should have been – had the Big 12 not ruled TCU and Baylor as co-conference champions, TCU definitely would have got in. And you can thank West Virginia for that, because that year Baylor, the only loss they had was to West Virginia. So had they not lost to West Virginia, Baylor would have been in. So either way, I think one of those two teams should have been in over Ohio State, who was on their 18th string quarterback at that point. And I get that I know what happened afterwards, but still, when you look at prior to the playoff, TCU should have been in. And we've seen it time and time again where Alabama has gotten in, maybe when they probably shouldn't have.
Well, if I can discipline myself, Schuyler, to not call it a playoff, that's what I'm trying to do. It's an invitational. The teams are invited to play. It's not a playoff. When you got a playoff, you've got a set criteria of what you need to do to make the playoff. Just like in the NFL, you can go all the way down to a coin flip, tiebreaker, There's about 10 different steps, and it's never gotten down to a coin flip for a playoff spot. But you know exactly what you need to do to make the playoffs. You don't know what you need to do in this situation. So it's an invitational is what it is. It's not a playoff.
A blue blood invitation.
There you go. And again, one more point I'm going to make is that Washington would have been the worst record-wise, worst team to make the playoffs during these 6 years if all the conference champions get in at 10-3. Otherwise, everybody's at least 11-2 that would have been in the playoffs with all 5 conferences involved. So everybody's argument about a bunch of 8-4, 7-5 teams making the playoff is rubbish. It wouldn't happen.
No.
All right, Schuyler. Appreciate mixing it up with you concerning the college football playoff. Been a good time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Mark. It's been a pleasure, and hopefully we get to talk more this fall with some football.
So again, you catch it on the banner right there, Schuyler Callihan, Mountaineer Maven on Sports Illustrated, and lock it in right here at MarkRogersTV. All right, Schuyler, we'll catch you soon.
All right, thanks, Mark. Have a good one.